Hello! Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm kind of reinventing it this year and making it a mixture of all of my passions, one of which is reading. And I know this is an iPad, but this is what I use to read ebooks, so I have included it. In the month of January, I read 7 books. To some, that is more than they'll read in a year. To others, 7 books is not worth making a video about, but I am proud of my accomplishment and I want to document that. I think maybe as I continue to read more, which is a goal that I have for 2026, being on my phone less, reading more, I think if I document that, I will adhere to that goal more. So I want to talk about the books that I've read this year. So my first book of 2026 was People We Meet on Vacation. I read it for one day at the end of 2025, celebrated New Year's, and then finished it on like January 1st. I read it because I wanted to reread it prior to the movie being released. If you want my thoughts on the movie versus the book, I recommend checking out my TikTok where I posted a video with my thoughts on that. Overall, good movie. As far as an adaptation, it was an adaptation by the definition of the word. The last time I read this was quite a few years ago, and rereading it made me value the characters more than I did during my first read. I think I, like others, have a tendency to compare Emily Henry to Emily Henry rather than letting the work stand for themselves. And I remember this not being my favorite book that she wrote when I read it the first time, and having read it the second time, I can value it more for what it was. I don't want to do any spoilers because it's really big right now because of the movie, but overall, I would say I would still give it like a 3 out of 5 stars, but I can really appreciate the characters and their story arcs a lot more having read it a second time and comparing it to the movie itself. Which, if I'm comparing it to the movie, is it a book review? Not necessarily, because it's bringing in alternative factors. But I think I left reading this book liking it more than I liked it the first time. And I apologize for my cat rubbing up against the tripod and making it shaky. What are you gonna do? So that's the first book that I read in 2026. This is the second book that I read in 2026, Harper Lee's The Land of Sweet Tomorrow. It is a collection of short stories and essays. I will say what I struggled with this book was I struggled in separating the drafts of the short stories that are published in this from what is To Kill a Mockingbird, because the short stories here grew and became To Kill a Mockingbird, and it was hard for me to kind of like separate those two and take these as independent works that then inspired a larger story and built into a larger story. I will say these essays, especially the essay to Vogue about love, was it was a really good essay. I wouldn't say it's like the best essay I've ever read, but it was wonderfully written and had some very good similes and metaphors for love. I also love, I don't know if you can see like the edges being very rough and soft and not perfectly cut. That's some of my favorite things that a book can do. But as you just saw, it was very difficult trying to turn the pages to get where I want. Love, in Other Words, is the essay that I was referencing on page 127. There's only one kind of love, but the different manifestations of love are uncountable. Talking about a mother seeking out a sound in the night to keep her children safe. Looking up from a game to watch whatever your partner's talking about and like taking your attention away from something to be with your partner. Romans had multiple words for love due to the different kinds of love. Friend love, romantic love, sexual love. And that is what this essay reminded me of, is the different kinds of love. because we only have one word that encapsulates all kinds of love, we kind of don't necessarily separate them out in our minds as often as I think we should. The third book that I read this year was on my iPad as an ebook, so I'm just gonna put a picture of the cover here. It was Phantasma. Phantasma was really well written, and I can really appreciate the author for doing that. I think at first it kind of seemed like, oh, I have a dictionary and I'm gonna pull out words, but as I continued reading the story and getting used to the writing style, I kind of put it together that, like, not only is she a good author who knows how to utilize a thesaurus, the story is really unique, and it's kind of a blend of what's really popular now, what's been popular in the past, like the overall theme of the Hunger Games, not necessarily the commentary of the Hunger Games, but I was just really pleasantly surprised and ended up thoroughly enjoying the book. Again, I don't want to say too much, I don't want to spoil any books. So the fourth book I read this year was For Everyone by Jason Reynolds. It is a collection of poetry. And with poetry, obviously formatting is very important. You have line breaks, stanzas, capitalization, punctuation, they are all very important, and they do play into this. So reading it by looking at it rather than like an audiobook is really important. But what is unique within this book in comparison to like poetry in general is the font. For example, I'll just show this page, like the use of the size and actual selection of font for this line up here is vastly different than the rest of this piece of poetry on that page. And I find that I read poetry books very quickly because they are short, and I in retrospect, I know this about myself, and I know I can do better as a reader to think more and to analyze the poems and the imagery and the themes. Like, I can do that better when it's all the same font and text size. I feel like I just read through it and I think about it later after the fact rather than critically thinking while engaging with the work. But because of the use of different fonts and text sizes in this book, I think I was engaging with it actively a lot more than I would have otherwise. What's also really nice is that it's an overall narrative. Like, the entire book is one narrative broken up into sections and different poems, and talking about not being afraid to dream and pursue your dreams. And you know, it might take longer than you expect it to, but you can adjust your timeline to meet your ultimate goals and succeed in what you want to do. And reading that in 2026, where I'm starting new endeavors, but I'm not where I imagined I would be 10 years ago, it was kind of nice. It's like, you are still your best advocate, and you should support yourself and believe in yourself, because if you don't, why would anybody else? So it was definitely like kind of revitalizing to read, and make me, you know, pursue things again, like posting this YouTube video, because I have not been active on this platform in a very long time. So yeah, definitely a good read. The fifth book that I read this year was also an ebook, so I will put the photo here, but I started the Game Changer series. And I started it because I watched Heated Rivalry, and I can't stop thinking about Heated Rivalry and restarting Heated Rivalry. We have since moved on to Bridgerton, but I so enjoyed Heated Rivalry and the cinematography and the storytelling via film as a method of creating art and telling stories that I was like, I'm gonna read the actual thing that inspired this. I'm going to read the series. And episode 3 was my favorite. I adore Kip and Scott and their relationship. So I wanted to start with book 1, Game Changers, that starts with Scott and Kip and tells their story. And I've only read the first book, but I probably would have DNF'd the book had I not watched Heated Rivalry. It just, to me, was not good writing. It was very dialogue heavy. It was very telly, not showy. And I love good description. I love action. And there was action, but I feel like in the parts that were not, in the not smutty parts, it was lacking in action and description in comparison to the smutty parts. So I will continue the next book. I want to see if Rachel's writing improves because we've got such a magnificent piece of cinema out of the books. I want to support them and see what's next, you know, like starting Shane and Ilya's story. But I will say I was disappointed in reading it. It was also like her first book. There's Room for Growth. I've only read one book. Had I not watched the show, I probably would not have finished the book. Particularly the scene in which, in the show, Scott's looking up at Kip in the stands after they won the cup. Spoilers. In that scene when he's surrounded by his team and their loved ones, their support system, who are all coming out there to be a part of this unforgettable moment that they worked so hard for, and Scott's alone, I was so excited to read that realization with him looking into the stands, locking eyes with Kip, and no longer being afraid because he wants to share this moment with the most important person in his life. And I felt like, you know, his entire coming out was slightly different in the book than it was on the show, but that moment felt a little bit lackluster when reading it compared to watching it. The sixth book I read so far this year is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I bought this book and have had it on my shelf for about a year and a half, slightly longer, almost 2 years. And I bought it because I heard amazing things about it. And I just put it on my shelf, and I have read other things. I just haven't picked it up. And then my best friend Stephanie sent me a picture of 3 books on the floor and said, what book should I read next? And this was one of them. And I said, I'll read it with you, and we can have a 2-person book club if you want. We have yet to talk about it as a book club. But I was honestly blown away. I think the approach in which this story is told, as if it's Emily writing in her journal, gives it a uniqueness that I haven't seen in a while, where it's slightly academic, slightly narrative, slightly just jotting things down, very scientific. And I was kind of eager to continue reading and seeing how the story would unfold in that manner. I did struggle with the Nordic Slavic words and learning how to pronounce them, but I took that as an opportunity to grow and learn new pronunciation and just like the mythology in that realm. Heather Fawcett breaks the show don't tell rule by telling us things in a way that I didn't expect, that kept me intrigued. Essentially, it's a line talking about how Emily, the protagonist, does not believe one person is necessarily fully human. And of course, I was starting to guess that based on the context of which she formulates this thought. But the way in which it's said of, I don't think he's human, and then she, as a scientist and a scholar in this book, backs it up with evidence, I thought propelled the story rather than taking me as a reader out of the story. I felt like it was very fitting and kind of refreshing to read such a different style of writing. So my final book for the month of January is Howl's Moving Castle. This is my book club books pick for the month of February. And I picked this copy up about a year ago at one of my local bookstores does an adult book fair at our local brewery. I picked up this copy because Howl's Moving Castle is one of my husband's favorite movies. So we've got that on DVD and we'll watch it once or twice a year. And I was really eager to read the work that inspired the movie. And if that is why you are picking up this book, just pass on the book. You don't need to read it. There are some stark differences. I would equate it similarly to the adaptation of How to Train Your Dragon, where it is loosely inspired. It has some similarities, some character names, some overall aspects are the same, but ultimately the storyline is different. So if you're reading this because of the movie, I would say you don't have to. But I would also say, on quite the contrary, that if you want to relive the movie or if you want to live this story twice, the two are so different that it would allow you to live it twice. I can understand, from an animation standpoint, from how do we sell tickets to this movie standpoint, why they cut out what they did. There are some things where I was not, necessarily like, okay, I'm going to spoil this because this book came out in the 80s, and I feel like 40 years is long enough where if you're going to read it, you're going to read it. Howl is a multi-dimensional wizard. He grew up in Wales, like Wales of our world in the UK, and somehow finds his way into the world where Sophie lives. And at some point, we go and visit his family who's still in Wales to pick up something, and I could understand where we were going, and I thought maybe it was time travel because of the movie and the time travel aspect in there, but I did not think it was going to be like this multi-dimensional wizard from another world, and it took me out of it. Like, honestly, I did not need computer game references. I did not need a car that Sophie couldn't comprehend as a carriage without horses. I didn't love it, and I don't know if it necessarily added much to the story. Howl still could have been a wizard from the other side of the world that the Witch of the Waste had never heard of. And it could have just been done that way. I felt very distracted and detached from the story when we talked about it in that way. And then the ending in which Howl and Sophie fall in love, the way in which the story was told through Sophie's perspective, through seeing her feelings towards herself and towards Howl, I did not buy that they fell in love at the end. I truly did not. It felt like we had just jumped the gun and, oh, okay, they love each other, but she just 5 pages ago had a realization that he had been kind to her the whole time. How did we jump into love? I felt like the ending moved really, really fast in comparison to the rest of the book. But I will say, Sophie has 2 sisters in this. She has a whole family, and what she does is influenced by her feeling responsible as the eldest daughter. Cue the song by Taylor Swift. But I will say, having that background makes me understand her character a lot more in comparison to the movie, where we don't have that background, we don't have that knowledge. I think having a little bit more development into Sophie as a character would have benefited the movie more. These are the 7 books, 2 ebooks on the iPad here, that I read in January 2026. For February, I'm trying to read only classics, and then in March, I'm trying to read only nonfiction and really branch out from what I've been reading typically. I've gotten into a very definitive reading habit, and I'm trying to expand my horizons. So if you want to see more about that, click subscribe. Thanks. Bye.